A couple of years ago, something unusual happened to me. I read the same book twice. And as a journalist, it's rare that I read a book once, but this one I read twice. And I guess you guys probably know it, maybe some in the audience also knows it. It's called Robots Will Steal Your Job, But That's Okay. And it was a book written about a subject that we will be discussing today, about automation, about artificial intelligence, about robots, and what the future will look like for the average worker. And the first part of the book is about the possibilities and what will change in the future, and the final part of the book is his suggestion as to what we do, the rest of us, once we become obsolete in a very short period of time. And he suggests that we start a kitchen garden to grow our own food and to start spending less, because we won't be needed anymore very soon. And but he says it's okay, but you can just sit back and relax. And that all sounds very nice, and I enjoy gardening, but until we get to that point, maybe we need to look at what we do before the robots are so smart that we can just do nothing but garden. And that would be embracing this new technology like the two gentlemen here has done. And I think it's interesting, the robots will steal your job part, because that's my evil boss gene goes directly to how many people can we fire over this, and how much money can we save. And I start looking around the newsroom and all the supporting functions in the newsroom, in the library, or in the translation department, in the archive, and everywhere where some of these functions might be automated, and people are doing repetitive stuff that could probably in the future be turned into an algorithm, and these money be spent on more important things such as journalism. But the robots will steal your job. It could also apply to someone like me or someone in the audience. Even as brilliant as journalists are, maybe some of the stuff that we do can also be automated. And this is where the guests of this panel comes in. Is this also something that threatens the livelihoods of people like myself and my colleagues at TV2 Denmark, where people are paid like 100 million euros every year to work? So our bosses will naturally be looking at automating different functions, computer systems, robots, and the likes. So, but from what we will hear from these two panelists is that this is not just a matter of having fewer people and spending less money to produce journalism. It's also about enriching the journalism that we already do and creating journalism in a way and in a scale that wouldn't be possible without these systems. So I think what we will hear is that some of these tasks that is being done right now that could be considered boring or repetitive or just a waste of time, really, can be done by a computer. And I think we will start off listening to Hugh Westbrook, who's from Sky News. And what Hugh and his team in Sky has done is to enrich an experience that wouldn't have been possible without these systems, that gave the users a different experience and a more modern, maybe you could call it a younger approach than what would usually happen during a big story like a royal wedding. So I think, Hugh, if you would introduce yourself a little bit in a bit more detail, and then tell us about your project.
Great, well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you today about our royal wedding project. So, my name is Hugh Westbrook. I work on the product team at Sky News and Sky Sports, but I wasn't always in the product technology world. I come from a journalism background. I was an online journalist for a number of years. So I always have journalism and technology in my mind with the projects that I work on. And to me, it's about finding that sweet spot between technology and journalism, and how can you use technology to tell a story in a way that hasn't been told before and give users insights that they haven't had before. And I think the artificial intelligence that we used in our royal wedding project was a particularly good example of that, and gives us ways that we can move on in the future and find other things that we can do. I'm also aware of the irony of standing up right now to talk about the royal wedding on the basis there's another royal wedding just finishing as we speak in the same location with a lot of the same people in attendance. We obviously didn't get quite as excited about this one as we did about Harry and Meghan back in the day, but I am aware that we are doing royal weddings an awful lot at the moment. So what did we do? So our royal wedding project was about using artificial intelligence, particularly facial recognition, to recognize wedding guests as they arrived at the church for the wedding of Harry and Meghan back in May, and to give our users information about who those people were when they arrived and why they'd been invited, what their connection was to the royal couple. We wanted to offer that live, and we wanted to offer that as an on-demand solution when we'd finished as well. Why did we do it? Well, a couple of reasons. Sky is big and bold and innovative and likes to take chances and make a splash on the very biggest of stories. But also, we knew it was a subject that was of interest to our users as well. The conversation around who was going to be at the wedding was quite a key one in the build-up. So if we could offer a companion app that would give people that information, we felt that it would be value to our users, as well as having that big technological statement about how we were going to cover the day. So that was what we were trying to do. Now, for a project like this, there's an awful lot of things to think about, and there's things to think about aside from just the technical side of it. For example, how are we going to get the pictures in? What was our camera solution going to be to give us a steady, guaranteed stream of people as they arrived? What was the weather going to be like? If it was raining, would we see people? Would they all be carrying umbrellas and scurrying underneath? When people are covered up by an umbrella, facial recognition is pretty difficult. Would they be wearing very large hats? Would they have sunglasses? Who was going? That was a huge issue for us, because the reality was not only did we not see a guest list in advance, I don't think I've seen a guest list even now, some months later. So there was an element of editorial judgment and guesswork about who was actually going to be attending, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that was relevant in a minute. So we had all of these considerations to think about that were sort of journalistic and production on top of the technical side of it. But ahead of all of that, there was the fundamental question, technically, how are we going to do this? So what we did was we had to put together a very large team of people to do this. So we partnered up with a number of technology companies who would help us. So we partnered with a company called Grey Matter, and Grey Matter are a small startup company whose job is to basically, I suppose you should say, harvest metadata. Their job is to go out there, use the very best suppliers, and find ways of analyzing content and analyzing data and bringing that data to the surface and giving people a chance to interact with it. So they worked with me as the overall project manager and pulled all the team together. We worked with Amazon, who provided us not only the infrastructure for the workflow, the video tools that we used, some of the hosting solutions that we needed to make this whole thing work, but they also ended up as the supplier for the facial recognition software as well. Grey Matter looked at a number of different partners to see where the facial recognition would work best, and felt that the Amazon recognition model was the one that was most successful. So we plumbed that in as well. And we also needed to give our users something that they could interact with, both live during the event and at the end of it. So we used a company called UI-Centric, who had experience of building video web experiences that were interactive and different. So we needed to pull all these people together and get together as a project team across multiple time zones and multiple continents to make this thing happen. And we didn't have a lot of time. We decided at the beginning of this year, this will be great, let's do this. We really only got going in the middle of February. We had less than 3 months to do a project that really should have taken 6 at best. But the fact was, we were all willing to take the challenge on because we all felt this was a challenge worth taking. Our technology partners and ourselves decided that this was something we could really throw ourselves into. I mean, we cut it relatively tight. I think we finally signed it off at 9:30 the night before, but that's kind of reasonable for a project like this. But it was a hair-raising and scary type of project to take on. And bear in mind, we only knew 100% it was going to work once we actually did it. So we did go into it on the day thinking there is a chance this is going to fail. So, we're like a bit of drama in our lives. So there were 2 phases to what we did. What did we do in advance? And this is very important, because I mentioned the guest list, and what we were very keen to do. Clearly, not making mistakes was very, very important to us. So what we wanted to do was not allow those facial recognitions to go into the ether and to have the chance of finding any conceivable person. We only wanted returned results to be from a subset that we had created. So we had a team of people who went off and researched potential wedding guests, put the list of people together, and then found images for those potential wedding guests to train the database to be able to recognize those people, and then we practiced against that set. Of course, once we'd started it, then it was announced that dignitaries, royals, overseas ambassadors weren't being invited, only family, friends, and people who knew them were being invited. So out went all the politicians and the foreign ambassadors, and in came more people that our researchers were able to identify who we felt were going to be there. We also put ourselves in because we felt we needed to test the system out. So a bunch of us spent one chilly March morning marching up and down in front of an office in Sky, being filmed at various intervals in groups of 2 and 3, and wearing hats and carrying umbrellas and sunglasses and the like. And we became a key part of the training data. So that was what we did in advance to actually populate the database with the right people, prove that the model worked, work on our camera angles, and get all of those aspects right to ensure that we had a successful time on the day. And then on the day itself, we had this. I'm not going to attempt to talk you entirely through the technology of this diagram. I'm happy to share afterwards. But roughly what happened was we took pictures from a pooled camera outside the chapel at Windsor Castle. Those pictures were fed up into the cloud and processed by Amazon. They were cut into chunks of 8 seconds. Those 8-second chunks were analyzed to pick up the faces. The data was fed down to our team of operators. Now, as I said, we were keen not to make a mistake. And it's really important to emphasize that we didn't trust the AI 100%. We absolutely trusted the AI to get most of the identifications right and make that checking job easy, but we weren't prepared to put anything to air that hadn't been verified by a human being. So we'd had a team of researchers in advance getting the guest list together and feeding the system with the images. They were then the people who worked on the day to have these little chunks of video coming back to them with a list of names. I'll show you what the interface looked like in a minute, and they would confirm that those people were right, and they were able to weed out the mistakes. So that partnership between human and technology is very, very important. The project wouldn't have worked without the AI, but it wouldn't have worked without the people as well. So the operators were fed their subset of information, they made the connections, and then a data feed from that was fed back up into the cloud, where it met the video again seamlessly at the other end and played out to users, and they could see people arriving with name tags on the top and biographical information. We'll see, have a look at that at the end and see how it looked. So that was the workflow that we used. Talk about a few things in a little bit more detail. I mentioned just now that we used a shared camera with the BBC. We'd have liked our own camera, but the nature of these things is that you share a lot of resources. We were happy enough with the position that we had. It was face on. It was a long enough time for people to walk, but it was important that we had a look at it. So that's me. That's me walking down. That's where the camera was, outside the door. I'm kind of ambling a little bit. It's as close as I was ever going to get to being at a royal wedding. But what we liked about that was we got a sense that you would get 5 to 10 seconds of somebody strolling down, walking towards the camera. You get a nice face-on look at them so that you would have a good chance to make the identification. So we were happy with that position. As I said, then the feed was taken, it was chunked up and taken by AWS and processed down. It went into the Grey Meta platform, and the Grey Meta platform is where our editors worked. So they edited the images, they put the images in there, and they worked in that platform on the day. And what was interesting about the evolution of this was that we worked with Grey Meta to put this interface together for the editors, and then we evolved it and changed it during our rehearsal process. So have a look at this, and this gives you a basic idea of what the platform looked like. So what would happen? An editor would typically get a list of recognitions. It would take a shot from the video saying, we've identified this as a person. Here's our reference image for what we think who this person is. Here's the name of that person. Do you agree? And then they would have 40 seconds in the end to confirm that they were right or not. Now, we made some interesting changes during... this is a nice video, I didn't make this. We made some interesting changes to this process during the rehearsal. For example, we made a decision initially that we would default to yes rather than no for whether somebody was right. We changed that in the last week because we became conscious in our testing that when you had big group shots, there was a pretty good chance that we identified too many people for the editors to be able to take out in advance. So we felt it was safer to go no and get them to check back in. We also cut out percentage uncertainty. So it would return results with a confidence level, 50, 60, 70%. So we set a bar, I think it was around 60 or 70%. Anything below that wouldn't be returned to us as a result. Anything above that was returned to us, but also in uncertainty order. So the least certain result would sit at the top of the list. So the editors could potentially spend more time on that to make sure that they were right or not. We also found that rather than clicking, the editors could tab through that yes, yes, yes option at the other end. So all of those things were incredibly useful ways of adapting the technology tool that we'd built and making it work better for the editors once they'd actually worked with it. So we evolved that very, very close to the day itself. Now, I mentioned earlier that facial recognition isn't perfect. And facial recognition does present some problems. We were aware that facial recognition technology could look at a picture of a chihuahua, or could certainly look at a picture of a muffin and identify it as a dog. We wanted to avoid this. Now, we didn't have any chihuahuas or muffins attending on the day, but had we done, we knew we could have dealt with it. So instead, we focused very hard on building up what you might call a really good data set. And to us, a really good data set was 10 to 15 high-quality images of an individual looking straight at the camera. And we had to evolve that process as we went along as well. I think all of our partners learned what made a good training set. So there was a lot of research going on there to get very good images. That's a very good example of a training set there. So those were the things that actually went into our database. But it's worth bearing in mind that with the best preparation, the best will in the world, stuff can still go wrong. So we initially had the King of Cambodia in our list as a potential guest because we thought lots of foreign heads were going to come. What we couldn't understand during our testing is why he kept coming up as a result when he was wrong. He came up for me once, and I think we can judge I'm not particularly a looker for the King of Cambodia. And we realized was that our reference images in the system for the King of Cambodia were very low quality, quite low pixels. And when the system was picking up an image of a low pixelated face, it was regarding that as a match and defaulting to the King of Cambodia every time. So that's where the percentage confidence came in, plus we took him out as well, just to make absolutely sure. Obviously, he didn't turn up either, which would have been embarrassing for all of us. Facial recognition is very good, but it can have some issues when you have identical twins. So clearly, it's very hard to train a database not to be able to differentiate between the two. How did we get around this on the day? Well, we hooked into their Instagram accounts. So we had a look on the day to see what they'd posted so we knew what they were wearing. So that when one of them arrived, we could identify them. As it was, only Lady Eliza came to the wedding. We were able to correctly identify her. I think the system got it right anyway. We were able to identify her correctly. They also have another sister who looks just like them as well. So we were slightly paranoid about these people throughout. And another thing facial recognition is very good at is learning a face. And as I said, we could legislate for hats and people changing superficial things about themselves. What you can't legislate for is when somebody changes their face itself. So I give you Mike Tyndall's nose. Now, Mike Tyndall, famous ex-rugby player, famously had a broken nose for a number of years, which, much to our disappointment, he decided to have fixed 3 weeks before the wedding. We trained the system on Mike Tyndall's former nose. We then had to retrain it on Mike Tyndall's new nose. We were delighted to reveal that we correctly identified Mike Tyndall when he turned up. So as I said, we finished the solution off, the connections went together, the metadata was put together, streamed back to UI-centric, and we had a few considerations in particular with the front end that we built. It had to be mobile friendly, we've all talked a lot about that today. So it had to work for mobile users, which is 75% of the Sky News audience. It had to work in 2 orientations. We discovered that when you tilt a lot of video, some of the ability to control overlays disappeared. So we needed a way of getting away from that so that the interactions still worked on there. And in the video on demand solution, we wanted an interesting way to navigate through it. We didn't just want it to be a sit back and watch it. We wanted people to be able to find their favorite guests. So we offered a watch arrival option on the list. You could scan up and down the list of guests, interact with the button that said watch arrival, and it jumped you straight to that piece of the video where somebody arrived. So we thought it was an interesting way to give people the chance to explore the video itself. So let's talk about what happened on the day. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, on the day, all of our best laid plans fell apart very, very quickly. There was a very large wreath hanging outside the door, which was taking out some of our camera shots. We weren't doing foliage recognition, we were doing facial recognition, so that presented an immediate problem to us. The camera didn't keep still. It kind of whooshed around quite a lot, and it sort of lost some of the picture some of the time. We knew that the guests were due to arrive by bus, and we expected a steady stream of people walking in. What they tend to do is just arrive in clumps and walk in very quickly, far quicker than I'd walked when I arrived, which was extremely unreasonable of them. So the first few people to walk in didn't get recognized. We were getting quite jumpy. But then people slowed down and took more time, and we began to recognize them. Then we lost the picture for a couple of minutes, which was a small problem. Fortunately, nobody arrived during that period. And then we discovered that not everybody was going in through that door. Suddenly we realized Elton John had turned up, and none of us had ever seen him. So we were quite upset we didn't get the chance to recognize Elton John. But what all these problems said to us very quickly was, let's change our video-on-demand solution. Our original plan had been to take that big chunk of arrivals and just put it out as a VOD option. And instead, we quickly put together a new edit of key arrivals using other camera shots we hadn't had before. So it was a much better piece of video overall. It meant that our editors, you can see here, working on the sort of attributions in the afternoon, had to do a completely new workflow we'd never trained them for, which we made up on the spot. And our technical partners who were in the office with us had to change a few things really, really quickly as well. So I think it was a testament to the flexibility of these guys and the technology we put together. We could turn that around that quickly. So we ended up with something we hadn't even rehearsed for. But I've talked about it enough, so we should probably have a look at it. So we'll have a look at the live first. So there's our shot. You can see the bush, which is rather lovely. And you can see it panning and zooming and doing all that lovely stuff as well, which we weren't very happy about. But this is what happened. So as people arrived, the name would pop up on the right-hand side, or on mobile, or pop up underneath. And then you had the option to interact with that and find a little bit of information about them. And crucially, why they were there. We didn't want it just to be a kind of random. As I mentioned, I'm as keen on the journalism as the technology in this, and there had to be a good reason why we were featuring these people and why they were there. So they were the pictures that we put out during the live event, and that ran for about an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4, and it went very, very quickly, as I'm sure you can imagine. I don't think the weather is quite as nice today for today's wedding, but I believe it's even more celebrity-studded than this one was. We'll flip in a second to the video-on-demand solution, he said optimistically. Just allow you to enjoy a bit of wedding scenery, and there we go. So this, you get a different look. So this is where you can see we've got a variety of different images coming in. So we were able to make more use of some of the other cameras. And crucially, you can see we've now got the watch arrival option there. So in this example, somebody has clicked and watched Idris Elba arriving. We didn't know he was coming in advance. We had to drop him into the database on the morning so that we could actually show him arriving later in the day. And there, as I promised, is Lady Eliza Spencer, whose clothing we knew about from having checked in advance. So that's a little bit of an example of what the application looked like. So how did we go? Well, as I mentioned, facial recognition isn't perfect, but we were 70% accurate on the live experience, 80% accurate on the VOD, which we thought was pretty decent. Very popular, 1.8 million page views, 850,000 unique visitors looking at it. Over 200 countries. I mean, admittedly, page views were 1 or 2 in some of those countries, but it did show there was worldwide appeal, worldwide interest in this application. And people interacted with the biographies, and a number of them, 264,000, interacted and watched individuals' people arrival. And I'm just curious, quick show of hands, who do you think was the most popular celebrity on the day? Anybody who thinks it was George Clooney? Pippa? Or David Beckham? It's always David Beckham. So just to sum up, 3-month deployment window. Crucial thing about this was the coordination, communication between us. We made use of existing, we didn't build new technology. We picked up technology that was already there. The training data was key, and the human curation was key. And I think it's just worth emphasizing that last point. This was a partnership between technology and humans. I think that's a really important thing to say. This technology is not perfect yet, but it enables and allows us to do great and exciting things that we couldn't do before. I can't emphasize enough not to be scared of this stuff. You know, it's really important to embrace it and work with it, but know what its limitations are. Because if it's used in news production, things for our users, things in behind the scenes, things in the newsroom, it's got incredible power to make the whole news industry a great deal better. We just have to be prepared to kind of jump in and see where it can take us. So thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I just want to mention that after we are done with both the presentations, you can ask your questions to the gentleman here. But we move now to Gary Rogers from ENEX Media.
Yep.
And Gary is doing something as scary as letting computers publish articles, or writing them even. And this is, of course, something that should interest any journalist in the field. That is this the future, writing hundreds of articles all over the country based on data? Let's hear how you've done this.
Maybe, I'll try and explain. So thank you. So I spent 25 years in the broadcast industry, so probably feel more comfortable sitting over there than up here at the moment. And it's that happy accident, which is why I'm here, because I know Adrian from a previous life. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I got interested in data and data journalism. I don't know why. I think I was in between jobs. And I got interested in that and set up a small data journalism startup called ENEX Media. And I accidentally bumped into AI because I was too lazy to keep writing the same thing over and over again. And so this is a story about trying to use a set of what are now called AI tools to try to do a job I didn't want to do, and which turned into a business. So I run a business called Radar. Radar obviously stands for reporters and data and robots, because if you're going to do an AI thing, you have to have robots in the title, so that when the story about your company is covered by anyone, there's a photograph from stock photography of a pair of robotic hands on a keyboard. So, and that pair of hands has been following me around the internet for about 2 years now. What is Radar? Radar is a joint venture. It's a joint venture between ENEX Media, my business, and the Press Association. The Press Association is the national news agency of the UK. And together, we came up with an idea of using a technology called natural language generation, which in very simple terms is a technology which allows you to take a sheet of numbers and turn it into a page of words, and to do that, to write stories for the local news industry. And we approached the Google DNI. I know people from European markets will be familiar with the Google DNI, and they rather liked the idea and decided to give us some funding to help us get it off the ground. So why did we do that? Well, it struck us that over a number of years, the consumption of news has been transformed. It's changed completely how users interface with news. But what's stubbornly unchanged in a way is the way we gather news, the job of a journalist. So largely, you want some on-the-ground news gathering, you want an eyewitness to events, and you want a reporter, and it's often usually a single person. This person's obviously got a typewriter because they're being traditional. And their output will be a single thing. But we began to think, could you do that differently if you started in a different place? That instead of interviewing some people on the ground, could you interview a spreadsheet? And could you take data as your input source? And could you provide some machinery to accompany your reporter on their narrative journey? And if you could do that, would you end up with multiple stories instead of a single story? And could we use NLG technology to enable that, to combine the reporter and the machine? So why would we do that? We thought we were trying to solve a few problems. The local news industry particularly has problems. The whole news industry has problems with monetization, but the local news industry in most markets has particular problems. And yet, it seems that the appetite for news is greater than ever. People want to be informed. There's more and more information being published, and a difficulty for a citizen to be well informed and find out that information. So could we do something to take some of that information and make it more accessible for people? Could we do something at a scale? Because news is one of those things that slightly defies scale. So could we do something at a scale which meant that we could get production to a level that would enable all local newsrooms in some way? Could we try and help the industry? And going back in a way to the conversation we had this morning about fake news, at a time where trust is a little bit flaky around the media sometimes, could we do something around news stories for local media that were determinedly fact-based and data-sourced, in which the source was transparently exposed to the reader? So could we show them our sourcing? And if we could do some of those things, how would we do them? And could we do them in a way which innovatively got reporters and machines to work together? Some of you may be aware of some projects the Associated Press have done in the United States using NLG technology to automate the writing of financial earnings reports. Some other people have experimented with the technology of writing minor league sports results to try to feed some data in from those sources and get a text output out. What I thought we needed to do here to apply this into news, rather than a recurring set of financial results, was to try and devise a way where human and machine worked more closely together, rather than trying to set up one algorithm and let it run in the background and always feed it with the same data. To have human hands on that algorithm and on those machines for each story. So the process needed to be more human. And so our solution has been a process which allows us to produce a very high volume of localized news stories for the whole of the UK news market. And we've been doing this and distributing stories across the UK now for about 4 months. And those stories get to local audiences, telling them about what's happening in their area based on the data that's produced there, because a lot of what happens around us is now recorded in data and made available to us. I'd like to take a few minutes to explain what it is we do, because everyone talks quite a lot about AI, and as Hugh said, you need to get hands onto the technology. So what is it that we're actually up to, and how does it inform the people in this room and the staff who work for you? Tipping Peter's point on its head, I don't know if the robots will steal our jobs, but they might change some of our jobs, and indeed they might invent some new jobs, and I hope that's what we might have done. So we started this process with an idea that open data was a very neglected source of good news stories. In the UK market particularly, there are vast amounts of data being published by government bodies, by police forces, by the health service. It's been made available for people to use in a journalistic way or to power their businesses. Anyone who uses a transport app is probably using live transport data from a local transport company. Anyone who's using Citymapper will have that. And so the data's out there, but journalists haven't been great at getting into it because there's so much of it. And what do we do with that? But if you looked at it, quite a lot of it covers the classic pillars of what we do in news, and particularly what we do in local news. Lots of health stories, lots of stuff about transport, lots of details about education in our schools, quite a lot of stuff about crime, but also entertainment and the environment and leisure. So within the UK data sphere was a lot of untapped material which we thought we could try to use. And when we started looking at it, we realized that a lot of the data was not just national data, a lot of the data was really segmented down to little local areas. And so we ended up looking at data sheets where every row of the data was an area, and for every area there was a story. So going back to the start, I thought, great, I can write lots of stories, can't I? Well, I could if I really had the time, but I didn't have the time. I couldn't write 300 stories. And that's what was sitting in front of me, potentially 300 stories or more for 300 different markets. And I might write one about the whole data sheet, about what's happening across the UK, and this is the place with the highest number of these things, and this is the place with the lowest, and this is the place where it's changed. But actually, there's a story for 300 or more different newsrooms there, if you could get them out. So how do you do that? So what we did was we started looking at natural language generation, and we used a piece of software produced by a company called Aria, and we used that as our writing tool. But before we do that, we do a human process. We do some data journalism. We actually try and find out what the story is in the data. And in the data, there might be more than one story. And the storyline for one row of the data might not be the storyline for some of the others. So we've got to think cleverly about what the spread of stories in any data sheet might be. And when we've done that, and we have a clear idea of what we're trying to do with this data sheet, and a clear plot in our heads, like a little tree in our heads of what the stories are, then we can bring the automation tool in. We put our data into an automation tool, and now we're using this as a write-in. We're not using a CMS, we're not using Microsoft Word, we're not typing on a typewriter, we're writing in a piece of NLG software. And that's a little bit different than writing. So what one of my reporters has to do is try to write every version of the story. So every word and sentence they write, they have to have in their head that the numbers behind this version of the story might change that sentence. So they're going to have to write multiple versions of every sentence to go with the numbers. This is quite hard to do, and sometimes you go mad and wrap your head in the cold towel and try and hope for the best. It'll take a day to write a story. You're not going to be knocking this out in an hour unless the data set is very simple and there's only one story strand. So you'll end up with lots of different versions. You can see on the side there all those little individual templates. They're all individual different angles and approaches to the story. And each story is triggered by a number. So you're saying, if the number's this, then say this. But if it's lower than that, say that. And if it's much higher, then say this. And you're trying to do that with every sentence of the story. Because ultimately, you're going to build a template, like a little mini algorithm, and you're going to feed it with numbers, with the data set you've been looking at, and it will pull in the numbers, and it will then compute what sentence you wanted to deliver to match that set of numbers. But if you're producing 300 or more stories, versions of the same story, you can't send that down one pipe to everybody, because most of your customers would be very annoyed with having 300 versions of the same story when they only wanted one for their local area. So we also had to build a smart way to distribute the content based around the 391 local government areas of the UK. So all our data was mapped to those things. So every story we do, no matter what the data granularity, divides up into 391 different story sets. And so you tap in your area to our platform, and it gives you all the stories we've done from that area. We've been doing this in full pelt since about June. We've run 160 projects, I call them projects, individual data stories. We've published probably now something in excess of 50,000 individual local stories over that time. I have a team of 5 people who do that. If you're as a client, you come to our platform, you tap in your area, you look at the available stories, and bing, you hit your story, and you get a story which hopefully looks like it's written by a human, because actually it was. They just wrote it in a different tool, and then they used the machine to enable the mass production at scale. Pickup story's been good. We work with the whole of the local news industry across the UK, the big local news publishers, largely focused on print and online. We also serve some radio stations and one local TV network. They take our content, ready to publish, and push it very quickly to online, because we're able to deliver down a lot of local channels for them. So they're able to get very localized and hyper-local stories from us. But rather surprisingly, and we thought this would be the new frontier of digital products, we found that we sit on a lot of front pages in print as well, and that we've become a good source of page leads and front page splashes as people try to maintain their print titles with a diminishing workforce. And so with any one of those stories, there will probably be dozens or hundreds of versions of each story, each localized. So what are we doing next? We started in local news and text. We've added some images. We now automate some graphic input with each story as well. So we also feed some simple charts with the data and deliver an individual chart with every story. And I've just started on a process of trying to see what I can do in video to deliver some form of video asset with every story. So 300 individually bespoke videos for every story, perhaps. And we started in local news, but there are obvious areas of sport and finance and election coverage which are suitable for this sort of approach of taking one and producing many. And so we think there's quite a lot of avenue across there. And we're looking for other markets. The UK has a very rich data market, but there are about 10 or 15 other markets which have a good supply of data and a local news industry which would probably like a lot of stories. So we're in conversations with people about moving into other markets and replicating what we've done in Radar in the UK in other places. And that's the Radar project. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Hugh, for two very interesting presentations. I personally enjoy that these are things that are happening right now, that are being used and is being published, and not something science fiction we're talking about. This is something that users are benefiting from right now. I think we're ready to open up to some questions. And if you can just think about it, I will go first. I would like to, for a moment, to have you speak about other projects than your own. Do each of you have a favorite project in this kind of area that other people are doing right now? Something that could be interesting for us for another session.
I work in natural language generation. I take data and try and deliver a words output of it. I think there's some really interesting work being done in natural language processing using machine tools to help you find a story. The process we do is very human. I still think that the best person to decide which data set to choose is a human, not a machine. Because I think news is contextual and subjective and of the moment, and so I think human decisions around that are good. And I think the best way to discover a story in data, ideally, is also human, because of all those things still applies. Some sort of judgment about the topicality and the context in which I'm looking at this data. However, when you get to very, very large data sets, it can be hard for a human to do that, and I think to be able to develop more work with natural language processing of getting a machine to be instructed to look for things, to feed the process we're involved in would be very interesting, or even get the machine uninstructed to go look and see what it comes back with. And so I think those sort of projects are really interesting.
I'm not aware of other usages of the facial recognition technology and that kind of technology on the market at the moment. I think one of the things that was exciting for us and for our partners was that we'd taken those tools and put them out to an audience in a almost productionized way, in a way that hadn't been done before. But I think one of the areas that we talk around, in particular that video analysis that's of great benefit to, say, newsrooms, is the ability to use that against archives. So all news organizations have got huge archives of material, and it can be quite hard to find that material. I mentioned that we did testing and rehearsing, as well as the footage of us walking up and down. We sourced footage of other people in our training data to test against that. And I asked the news archive at Sky for, here's a list of people, can you get me some footage? And a week later, they came back and said, here we go, here's some footage. Now, if we'd used these tools to tag up and get proper data around the archive that we held, they could have done that incredibly quickly by just doing a search through the archive, because faces would have been tagged, objects would have been tagged, other things would have been tagged, and you can suddenly give yourself an incredibly rich archive of material by using these tools that is almost not impossible to use, but much more time-intensive to use at the moment. So I think that's the kind of conversation that people are having at the moment as a way of really making the best benefit from these tools.
Yeah, let's start over there, Shime.
question for Hugh. You said that the Sky News audience is 70%, 75% on mobile. How has this changed your output on TV, online, and mobile?
I've been at Sky News a long time, and when I first started on the website, we were stuck in a small room upstairs, and Sky News, ENEX Sky News luminaries here will probably remember that possibly people didn't even know we were up there. Since then, the mobile team has moved into the heart of the newsroom, and our latest newsroom, which we moved into 7 or 8 months ago, the team of journalists is absolutely in the center. We don't call them online journalists anymore. They're now referred to as the mobile team. So that sense of mobile journalism has become inherent in everything that we do. There is an expectation that reporters will file content for the mobile platform. But I think the other thing that's changed, as well as trying to do innovative projects like this and tell stories on that platform where people can't look, also video. There was mention earlier today of video changing from that orientation to that orientation. We do that already. Most of the video we produce for our mobile app is square or vertical in nature already, and we've put that into our production so that our video production is created in a way that is suitable for that. And to take it into the artificial intelligence world, because we know people watch that video a lot in silent situations, we spend time captioning many of those videos. There's a lot of captioned video out there these days. That's a labor-intensive job at the moment. Somebody has to watch the video, type it out, overtype it. We don't think that's a sensible use of people's time. We're actively looking at the moment at transcription tools, and then tools that will then take that transcribed text and overlay it straight onto the video. So we save the journalists time in their production, so they can go on and make a second video. We let the technology do that piece of subtitling for them.
Yeah, question for Hugh. How much was the cost of this facial recognition project? Do you have an estimate?
Lots of tiredness and grey hair, among other things. I'd rather not reveal the actual costs. There was obviously cost for the partners and the time. But I think the one thing that's worth mentioning is that by using the Amazon cloud model, that gave us much better control of costs. So in terms of the actual usage, we knew that we could scale up and down on the day according to whether we had large numbers of users. So if we'd had a huge bombardment of 1 million people coming in simultaneously, obviously our cost would have gone up, but also our ability to deal with that number would have been absolutely fine. What we didn't have to do was pay for unnecessary infrastructure in advance. So we kept control of the costs by having that approach to it. So rather than going into specifics, that gave us a way of controlling the individual costs. I hope that's sufficient.
Juan Carlos from Caracol.
This question is for Hugh. I have a question. The way that I understood is that you use the face recognition on your website. Do you use it in any way on your Sky News air signal?
No, we didn't. It was a specifically website and mobile application. But obviously, people in the newsroom were aware. If we'd picked up information that we could have fed in to the news gatherers, we would have done that. But there was no easy way to bring that onto the screen. Plus, as well, it would have had to have been a companion channel, if you like. Obviously, the channel itself was showing wedding guest arrivals, plus interviews, plus colour, etc., etc. So this was a dedicated feed just of people arriving. So in time, we might want to take this technology and run it out on the screen. But you'd probably need a second screen or behind a red button or some kind of interactive screen on television to do it. So it wasn't a consideration. I think one thing to mention is we had a very short time, so lots of ideas like that came up. We had to be very strict about saying no, sticking to what we wanted to achieve and just doing that. But in time, perhaps we could take it, yes.
And do you have any other plan to use the face recognitions different than the royal wedding?
There are situations where we think it would be interesting. We think situations where you have celebrities wanting to be recognized, so take an Oscars ceremony or something where people are overtly wanting to be seen. I think one interesting application, Grey Meta, were pushing us quite hard onto software that they've got that will also recognize a dress designer. So the idea would be if you're going to the Oscars, you could recognize somebody's face, then you could also recognize the designer of the dress that they're wearing and flash information up instantly to people about that dress and that dressmaker. So it's a way of giving people the kind of information that they're interested in that. We're also looking at politics a lot. There's so many politics set pieces. We can definitely see a use case with parliamentary sessions where if people are standing up, You can identify them, possibly bring up information about their parliamentary record, their views on things. So you've got that instant context while they talk. So I think those are the areas that we're thinking about at the moment. Whether we go for another big set piece, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the question my colleague just did. What about the tools that you had to develop to get this project working on the facial recognition? I mean, when it was over, did you find yourselves with tools that you could possibly use in the future for other AI uses, even beyond facial recognition? Or is it like a one-of-a-kind investment that you cannot use again? Or would you have to start from scratch if you had to do another project like this?
No, I mean, I think one of the things is that we used a lot of the time existing tools. So we hooked into things like Amazon recognition and some of their existing infrastructure. They simply hadn't been threaded together in that way before. So Grey Matter built that interface for us, the one that they use. But they will, because they own that, because they built it, they will reuse that. We could reuse that again. That's becoming a productionized tool now that could be used for this kind of event. But it will be much quicker to do it again next time, because that environment now exists. But I think the crucial thing to say is that we didn't do lots and lots from scratch in terms of developing. We simply hooked things together in a unique way.
Thank you both very much. In the work that both of you did you start to explore how machines learning might affect the outcome, as opposed to the effectively leveraging or making the humans more productive?
No, not yet. I think that everyone's placing a lot of store by machine learning, but I think you need a lot of money and a very big project and very deep pockets to actually get it to work effectively for you. I think it will come. But I think in the world of journalism, I still feel more comfortable with a fair amount of human hands and attention on doing it, and trying to build an immediate AI future, which is slightly more cybernetic, I suppose, of bringing people and machines together rather than machines doing things on their own. But I think there are ways of doing it with structured machine learning that will save journalists from quite a lot of grunt work in finding things, and will generate new story streams. And I think those are quite interesting. But I think they're a little way in the future in terms of commercially viable, practical, day-to-day, ongoing ways of working. Because I think a lot of what's happening is very shiny and glossy. A lot of what's happening will also be very costly. A lot of what's happening can work in a one-off, and I think, as with any new nascent technologies, it's about trying to find a way to harness them into your existing business processes, or to develop your business processes, so they are genuinely a new way of working, a new way to do something you couldn't do, a new way to generate a new revenue stream. And I think we're at a point with these sort of technologies where people are just starting to look at that. As Peter said at the start, the focus on AI has been always, can I just use that to replace some people? And I think there's a far more complex argument to be had around that. There'll inevitably be some of that, but I think it's how can we use these tools to do something we could not do before, which will have a higher value to it, or to do something we couldn't do before, which can be more extensive. And I think that's where the interesting work will come.
I have outsourced my question to a robot. Are there AI tools that can help in the fight against
fake news, that should have said. Complete experiment. But it's probably the human element that's let down. Are there any tools that you've discovered in your implementations with newsrooms that could be used to counter some of the issues that we've already talked about?
Do you want to go first?
I suppose Hugh's facial recognition work could actually work in something around fake news, I suppose, in terms of who are people who they genuinely say they are, and do we trust the machine to actually tell us that or not? I think I see that in a slightly broader framework about how do you deliver, going back to the fake news discussion this morning, how does one ensure trust in consumers to what you're doing? And there was some discussion this morning about transparency. And the thing that initially attracted me to working with data journalism was about the transparency of sourcing. So every story we write, we attach the original source data to that story, so that you can trust what we write. You can trust what we write. But should you want to know more about it, you can open the data sheet yourself, and you can have a look and a play around and see whether you agree with the way we've diced the data and come to the right conclusions. So I think there are some quite interesting things around transparency about these things.
And just to add to that, I think there's some interesting opportunities in terms of objective analysis of information. So Amazon and I did an experiment at Sky last week. So we took Theresa May's conference speech and took a transcription of what she said. We'd taken a transcription of her speech from last year, and we then ran a really quick analysis of the language that she used this year, the language that she used last year, and also the language Boris Johnson used in his speech this year. Quickly able to crunch the numbers using one of their language comprehension tools to get a kind of listing of the words, most used words, and words that weren't used last time, and produce some images very quickly to show the spread of language this year, but crucially the differences, the language used last year, the language used this year, and that generated a news story for us in terms of showing how she completely avoided certain words this year that she'd used last year, how she'd used certain words last year that she used this year. And I was very excited about that because that felt to me like a very objective piece of news reporting. And I'm keen to, and Amazon and I are chatting, we're keen to do more in that particular area because that's uncontrovertible facts. There's no spin, there's no interpretation. And if you can use the tools to analyze actual fact, then I think you've got a chance to generate stories that are definitely not fake news and definitely real. So I think if these tools are applied in the right way and developed with news users over the next few years, they could become a really powerful tool in that fight.
Do you let the users know that this was generated by a machine?
We mentioned it, yes.
And do you think it will make people trust it more or less?
Well, crucially, we said that we'd use the machine to create the data, but then it was written, obviously a journalist had written it, but again, it was very clearly written. The thing about that is it's uncontroversial fact, and we would quite happily, with probably a bit of fine-tuning behind the scenes, you could, again, as Gary mentioned about spreadsheets, you could put a spreadsheet of the actual language, the actual words used, broken down in terms of numbers. People can't argue with that as a fact. You're right about people wanting to sort of trust where the information has come from, but if it is that kind of objective analysis, you'd like to think people would appreciate the objectivity of it.
We had some very interesting conversations about attribution when we started the project. So we're an agency, so we're not going to consumer. We are going to a lot of clients, and we explained our process to them, and just said that we were happily for them to explain to their readers or not how the copy was produced. We issue our copy with the byline of the reporter who wrote the template, because that reporter has the greatest grasp of the data and constructed the template, that little mini algorithm that produced all those sentences and authored those sentences. And so there is a human name to it. But we left it up to our clients as to whether they said this story was generated with assistance from a technology. One client decided to do that and has now stopped doing it some months in. One client told me he didn't think that was relevant because he thought there were enough human hands across our process, but also it would be equivalent to writing in the paper, this story was written by the intern. That he didn't feel there was a need to put a disclaimer around something that he had the faith to publish. But they're quite interesting conversations. I think it depends on the level of unsupervised machine production you're doing and how transparent you need to be about that.
I think. Do you have time for one more, Adrian?
Andy from CBS. Gary, fascinating. Where do you get the data from, and how do you know that that can't have been manipulated by someone before you get it to end up with the right result?
We're using data from official sources largely at the moment. We're using open data published by the National Statistics Office, by the government, by police forces, by fire services. We're using data from very official sources. Even within that, we see things that look odd. And if it looks odd, then we start to question the data and go back to the data supplier and query the data. But any data journalism is only as good as the data. And so there can be mistakes in the original authorship of the data, but hopefully during the process of finding stories, we identify where those mistakes lie or not, or do not lie. And it takes me back to the idea of sourcing again, of here's what we found, here's the source, here's what we were given. And here is what we conclude from this. In the same way that any other journalist would say, this is the interview I did, and this is what the person told me, and this is what I'm writing about it. Was that person right? Well, I've written the story because I've taken them on trust that I believe them to be right, and that what they're saying is fair. The same applies to data. Data is like, in a way, needs to be treated like that source, sometimes with skepticism and sometimes with trust.
He stole my thunder. Is the journalist going for outside comment on the figures? Are you going for other sources to sort of, make it a full article to give both sides of an opinion on the police figures that say crimes dropped by 50%?
Yes, in short, because in looking at how this form of journalism had been done before, writing something which is strictly based on the numbers, which you might successfully do in finance or in sports, that you just do a very short brief around the numbers, doesn't work for a news story. You need some context to that story, and ideally you need comment on that story. So there's a human editorial process about building that into the automated work so that there is a rounded story which is ready to publish in news agency manner. So yes, we do that work as well.
And Hugh, did I hear you right? You said that you wouldn't do it again on a big set event?
It was a lot of effort, time and effort for one big set event, and I think while it's always exciting to do that, it would have to be a very big profile event to put that much effort into one event. So I think we are potentially more interested in developing it for more repeated uses at the moment. I mean, you never say never because you never know what's around the corner, but I think our feeling is if we can develop these tools up, that we can spin them up more often and use them more regularly, then we'll think we'll get more value in the long term.
And for your mobile user, what was the delay between the data appearing on the screen and the person actually walking into the church?
So it was roughly 2 minutes between when we picked them up on camera and it got to the mobile device. What we had to allow for, obviously, was processing time, editing time, meeting back again on the video times. We figured that roughly 2 minutes was as close to as live as we could get. We didn't expect people would necessarily be sitting watching the television, watching that. So we felt it was live enough, and we didn't want to compromise the editorial integrity of it.
So people were using it more for video on demand, looking for people after the event?
Both. I mean, those numbers were split fairly evenly across. So we had a very decent number of people watching it live just to see people arrive. But I think part of the thing with the arrivals was there was people, gap. So it wasn't quite as exciting an experience as we expected in that sense. But we felt that 2 minute tolerance was about right. If we could bring it down from a processing perspective, we could bring that down. But I don't think you'd ever want to cut that bit of time that the curation takes place. So we could probably bring it down to a minute once you fine-tune the processes, but I don't think we want to go any quicker than that.
Can I think I have a very quick question again about the numbers for Hugh. When you talked about a 70% success rate on the tech, the 30%, did it give you incorrect readings or no readings at all?
It would have been incorrect readings.
Okay.
And that's where the curation came in.
Okay.
But again, we would expect that to go up. As the technology gets better and learns more and picks up angles, we would expect that to get better. But we never went into this expecting to be 100% accurate. What we didn't want to do was broadcast a mistake.
Did you make any mistakes on the screen?
Live, no.
I found with our project, all the mistakes have been human. So that whenever we've got something wrong, it's been a simple data handling. And the way the technology has behaved has always been robust. So AI is about as clever as the human who's working it at this stage. And so we still have quite a lot of processes in place to try to check, because we're publishing up to 400 versions of any individual story. We're not reading them all before they're going out. We're having to sample as accurately as we can to make sure and put those samples through 3 or 4 check layer processes. But every mistake so far has been a human error. And I think, so our error rate as an agency is about the error rate of an agency.
I think that is a very good point to end this discussion with. Thank you both for joining us here. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.